what RG3 said about Kyle Shanahan here. I'm not triggered by control freak.
Yeah.
That's fine. And I'm mindful that RG3 probably has some feelings that are some type of way about Kyle Shanahan and anyone named Shanahan. Look, whether he thinks they hurt him or simply benched him, that's a part of this for sure. And so you got to tuck all of his opinions into that. And then I caught the same thing you did. RG3, and I know he didn't mean to do this, and I'll play it again for those of you just joining us. I know he didn't mean to do this, but, dude, don't put yourself on a list with the great quarterbacks of the game right now, because outside of a rookie of the year stretch, which really lasted, it felt like maybe it was like a 10-week run.
Yeah.
Dude, outside of that, you were never that. You never even had a season like Jalen Hurts had last year. Here's what RG3 said.
Kyle loves guys that are predictable, right? Look at even our team in Washington with myself and Kirk Cousins. Kirk was a guy that they knew, hey, if we draw this play up, he's going to go boom, 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 get it to where we think it should go. Whereas guys like myself, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, all these guys, there's a little more creativity to the game. Kyle's a control freak. Brock Purdy gives him a little bit of both worlds. He gives him the predictability of, hey, he's going to go through his reads and do this, but he can also create on the back end, and they just liked it more from Brock than they got it from Trey, and I understand that. And I'm hoping the best for Trey in Dallas or wherever his career takes him, but I do think that Kyle needs a guy that can kind of take the edge off for him and make some plays that aren't called in the playbook.
I just, I don't want to open up this box again because we've closed it and we threw it out with the trash. But even what he said there at the end, I think there's something a little bit that's tucked in there.
About Trey Lance.
Yeah. Oh, they liked it a little bit better. Are you kidding me? They liked it a little bit better. It's not even the same area code. As we stand right now, over the last 2 years, what they saw from Brock and what they saw from Trey could not be further apart.
Right.
They liked it a little bit better. Come on.
They liked it a lot better.
Yes.
The one guy started a game and lost and then got hurt, and then the other guy started every game that he ever started and won all of them except the one where he got hurt. So, yeah, they liked it a little bit more. They liked it so much that even though he was hurt in the offseason, they still never opened it up to an actual QB competition, even when Brock's elbow was surgically repaired and we didn't know if it was going to be healthy enough for the start of the year. They never once backed away from he's the guy.
No, and they hired someone to be his backup. They didn't even want him to be the backup.
Right.
Dennis in San Francisco. Hey, Dennis, you're on with Willard and Dibs. What's up?
Hey, guys. I think that RG3 knows that Shanahan's a little better than we do. And I don't know if you guys remember, he talked about his season. He got hurt that season. And then I don't know if you guys watched the playoff game when he should not have been out there. He had a severe knee injury. They put him out there. He was getting hurt during that game. They ruined that kid's career. Mike Shanahan and Kyle Shanahan ruined that kid's career, and I think the karma is following Shanahan because his quarterbacks can't stay healthy.
Okay.
He's walking it off with that. Karma.
Yeah. Thanks, Dennis.
Karma's a B is what that is. Because Mike Shanahan, as a head coach, got RG3 hurt, and Dennis was saying basically on purpose. So his son, when he becomes head coach, has carried that bad juju with him, and now karma has struck Kyle Shanahan from his days as a coordinator. And what Dennis left out is that 28-3 blown lead was also karma for RG3. Bum, bum, bum. Come on.
Look, Dennis is not the only one who feels like the Shanahans were loose with RG3's health. He's not the only one who feels that way.
Right.
I'm not going to claim to be an expert even on that. I remember watching it, obviously, but I wasn't covering the Washington, what they used to be called. And
nice.
I wasn't covering that. And so, and it's always hard, as it was with Kyle and Trey. It's always hard for me to blame a coach for an injury. It's hard for me to do that in the sport of football. These players know exactly what they're getting into. At least these days they do. They know what they're getting into. They're the ones who are often twisting the organization's arms to play. It's what Travis Kelce was just trying to do literally moments ago and still is, reportedly, with the Kansas City Chiefs tonight, and they won't let him. So that's a delicate balance, and I think the blame gets shared in there. But I will also say this. If you want to say it's karma for the last name, I don't know. I'm not going to buy that. I will say this out loud. If you're going to keep assessing Kyle Shanahan as a coach, then you have to keep it to when he was the coach. Stop calling him a choker for the Super Bowl with the Falcons, and stop saying he went out there and hurt RG3 with the Washington, what they used to be called. He was not the head coach in either of those situations. So he's not in charge. Oh, he's a control freak. Well, he wasn't then.
Right.
Because he wasn't even in charge. So you cannot pick and choose when you want to say someone's in charge. Kyle was not in charge of those situations.
You can't be a control freak when you don't have control.
You're not even in control. Exactly.
Right, and when you're the coordinator, you don't have control, especially when you are a coordinator and your dad is the head coach. It's not like he's walking up to dad saying, we're going to play RG3, Dad. I know you think that he's hurt, but we're going with him, Dad. That's how this is going to go,
Dad.
Pop. Totally. I learned it from you, Dad.
Exactly. I heard Trey Lance because I learned it by watching you.
Totally.
Let's go to Randy in San Lorenzo. Hi, Randy. What you doing?
On my way home. So anyway, I remember watching some documentary about RG3 and the Shanahans, and RG3 told Mike Shanahan that he wanted to be more of a pocket passer, okay? And then also, why didn't the Niners draft Mahomes? And then one last thing, I remember watching some talk show where Emmanuel Sanders pretty much said that that pass that Jimmy G threw him in the Super Bowl was his fault because he had commented, I just couldn't believe how open I was. Thanks for taking my calls, guy.
Okay, Randy, I don't even know. When you say the pass was his fault, who are we talking about? Whose fault?
Emmanuel Sanders. Sanders is saying it was his fault because he didn't realize how open he was, and I think the intimation is that he didn't run through the route, and maybe he slowed down.
Yeah, I don't even know what to do with that comment. These comments were all so different from one another. Why didn't they draft Mahomes?
I've been waiting for this comment. I've been waiting.
Because they didn't evaluate correctly.
Well, you know why they didn't draft Mahomes?
Boy, that's a great question.
Because of their 2016 roster. And I'm looking at it right now. The Chip Kelly team that went 2-14, they had absolutely no one. So you're Kyle Shanahan, you take over the team. Your first job is not to draft the quarterback of the future. Your first job is to figure out how to shore up a defense that was 32nd in the league in points allowed and to slowly piece together an offense that was 27th in the league in points scored. You had the worst roster in the NFL. So when you take that team over, you're not immediately thinking quarterback, franchise quarterback. That's how we started. You're thinking, how do I get a defensive line? And Solomon Thomas was a mistake. They got additional picks by flip-flopping with Chicago, one of which turned into Reuben Foster, which was a mistake. They got Ahkello Weatherspoon in that draft. He was a decent Niner.
Ups and downs.
C.J. Beathard, who turned out to be a quarterback.
Yeah.
Joe Williams was a miss. George Kittle worked out. Trent Taylor was a miss. DJ Jones worked out. Adrian Colbert was all right for a time. Their first draft was not an absolute slam dunk.
Not a great one. But
they inherited a team that needed about 35 things before they needed a quarterback.
Well, here's what I think. I think the reason that Randy is saying why didn't he draft Mahomes is because of the conversation you and I were just having.
Right.
If he could have any quarterback in the league, who do you think he'd take? I feel like some of you think it's Kirk Cousins, and I wholeheartedly believe it's Patrick Mahomes. And so he's saying, well, why didn't he draft him? Well, because we didn't know. They didn't know. Nobody knew. Even the Chiefs didn't know. They hoped. I don't know. I just, like, when can we tuck in to our draft evaluation that nobody bats 1,000 and that they did mess up on some of these. And that's part of the deal. Like, I don't think you get to go back afterwards and act like everybody knew that Mahomes was going to play like this. If that was the case, every team in the NFL would have tried to get him number 1 overall. But where did he go? 11, 12?
10.
I mean, come on. Why didn't he draft Mahomes? Because we didn't know he was going to look like that. I remember the Mahomes draft profile. It was rocket arm. We'll find out if he knows where it's going. It's the exact same profile that Josh Allen had. Well, they both hit. Okay, it took Josh a minute. Neither one of them was number 1 overall. Neither one of them were even top 5. So to act like everybody was supposed to see into the crystal ball on this, in my opinion, is unfair. While I will also acknowledge to you, they messed up. Yeah, they have not, like, you don't need anyone to tell you that the Niners and their quarterback evaluation and the way that they've put this together is clean and perfect. No, of course it's not. Of course it's not. So I get all that. I'm just trying to dispel part of what RG3 is saying. He's saying Kyle wants basically someone who's not as talented so he can control him. I disagree. I think Kyle wants the most talented player he can have at every position, as evidenced by the way they've handled the rest of their roster.
Right, and the rest of their roster is really, really good. And now what I think Kyle Shanahan realized, at least for this team, is that a quarterback on a rookie deal is the way to go. And if you think about Patrick Mahomes, if they would have drafted him in 2017, so you draft Mahomes on that rookie deal, and 17, you weren't very good. You got Jimmy Garoppolo on Halloween, and you won 5 in a row to salvage an otherwise dreadful season. And then Jimmy G was good. So you actually found a quarterback that was able to pair with your roster and be very good. By the time Mahomes was ready for his big contract, would you have been a good enough team to want to ink him to a second deal?
I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, Patrick Mahomes became who he is in large part because of Andy Reid and all of that offense that he has in Kansas City. And that's not what the Niners have ever had until maybe this year. And if you look at that same draft, Christian McCaffrey went number 8. So why don't we ever say, why didn't you take Christian McCaffrey? Or why didn't you take TJ Watt, who went in that same first round, or Jamal Adams, or Marshawn Lattimore, or Hassan Reddick, the guy who knocked Brock Purdy out of the game. I mean, there was a whole bunch of other legitimate first-round picks that the Niners missed on.
And they did. They missed.
Solomon Thomas.
I just wonder why everybody isn't sort of okay with that sometimes. I get it. If everybody, oh gosh, their misevaluation. Yeah, if they stunk at every draft pick, or even most of them, then okay, let's have that conversation, but they don't. They don't. The quarterback thing has not been clean. I think they're lucky to sort of end up right now where they are, where they've got someone who is cheap and productive. That is a win. In fact, if you really look at their philosophy, which I think you can argue with, I really do, this idea of we need a quarterback on a rookie deal. But if you look at the way they were approaching it, they have ended up with a 10 times better situation than they even set out to have. They set out to pay Trey Lance like $10 million a year. And they ended up paying Brock Purdy $800,000. So this cheap rookie deal that their quarterback is on is actually incredibly cheaper than the one they set out to have.
Right.
So that's a good break. That's a good break if he continues to produce, obviously.
Yes, and it's a break that's allowed you to keep and stock and have this roster that you have with Trent Williams and all the rest of it, including Nick Bosa, who signed a record deal yesterday.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like I've always, the drafts are there are going to be some misses. There are going to be some misses. I would not use passing on Mahomes 6 years ago as evidence that Kyle doesn't like good players. He likes controllable players.
Right.
Come on. I have a hard time buying that. Joe in the city. Hey, Joe, you're on with Willard and Dibs. How you doing?
Hey guys, here I'm minding my own business here, and you guys say some stuff that fired me up here, so I had to call in.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're debating this. Go back and watch the tape. In the Super Bowl, Kyle was asked, why didn't you pick Mahomes? And he said he did not even scout him because Cousins was out there. That's an unconscionable mistake. Unforgivable mistake for a guy who's supposed to be, the final authority of talent, not to scout somebody out there who's available.
Right, but Joe, that's not what we're talking about. Like, go ahead, but I do want to point out that's not what we said. But go ahead and finish your point.
No, if he wants to scout someone and then evaluates him, that's not my guy. Okay, but to say I'm not even going to do that. I'm not even going to look at some guys because I'm going to target somebody who's under contract with somebody else. That is an unforgivable mistake for someone, and that's the reason why he didn't draft Mahomes. Not because he wasn't in control, like a freewheeler or too talented. He didn't even bother to look at him.
Right. So here's
Deshaun Watson.
Yeah. Here's what I would say about that, Joe. That can be a deal breaker for you. It's not for me. Because in that moment, let's go back to that moment, what Kyle is actually saying is not, I didn't like Mahomes. He's saying that wasn't our plan. Our plan was not to draft a quarterback in the first round that year. And you actually did a very good job just moments ago detailing why. They had many other needs at every position at the time.
I could read their roster in 2016.
Oh, my God.
It turns into like a comedy show.
Totally.
Like, pick your favorite comedian, and I would put my roster reading up against any of them.
So, the plan was...
Margaret Cho, bring it on. Joe Coy, you got nothing on this roster.
Joe Coy, you know how much
funny.
I love Joe Coy.
You know what's funny? Is when I read the receivers they had that year. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'd rather you wouldn't.
It's a rib tickler.
No, they were terrible.
Awful.
So the point is their plan was Kirk Cousins. It actually changed to Jimmy Garoppolo. We all know the story. That's not what RG3 is saying here. RG3 is essentially insinuating that knowing what we know now, Kyle would still rather have Johnny Controllable over Pat Mahomes. And I think that's ludicrous. Totally fair to say what you just said with regard to what a miss, what a mistake to not go after Mahomes back then. Fair opinion, and that's great, but you're coming from a time when no one knew what Patrick was going to look like.
Right.
And that has to be entered into this conversation, and we have to remember how this conversation started. I'm simply dispelling the idea that as we sit here today, some of you seem to think that Kyle Shanahan would rather have Brock Purdy or Kirk Cousins over Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. I don't agree. I don't agree.
Yeah, and the whole thing about Kirk Cousins was curious because at the time he was maybe going to be a free agent, and then the Washington whatchamacallits ended up using the franchise tag on him for the second straight year. So if Kyle Shanahan was holding his breath for Cousins, it didn't happen until July when Washington decided to re-tag Cousins, thereby taking him off the board and leaving Kyle Shanahan with C.J. Beathard and Nick Mullins, I believe, in that year, where they went 0-10 to start the season, and then Kyle realized, oh, God, I need a quarterback. And, hindsight's 2020. Maybe he should have taken Mahomes or Deshaun Watson in that draft.
Of course, everybody should have taken Mahomes. If we had known that he was going to be the greatest player of a generation, then everybody should have taken him. And the Niners didn't, and you can totally call that a mistake, and I think that's fair. But here we are in the same spot where we often end up, I think, where you have listeners, fans of the 49ers, what have you, who are saying, this is an unforgivable mistake. Well, okay.
Sure.
What do you mean it's unforgivable? They're the NFC favorite. How can it be unforgivable? He's the coach. All of you are telling me you expect him to win the Super Bowl, which means on some level you trust him. On some level you think he's a good coach, or else you wouldn't say this. You wouldn't say you expect the 49ers to win the Super Bowl unless you think Kyle's a good coach. Or am I missing something here?
Has a bad coach ever won the Super Bowl?
I love the end.
Yeah.
I love the end. Thank you, sir. I love the end of the Super Bowl every year where that coach holds up the Lombardi and everyone's like, look at that joker.
He gets booed.
Yeah, he's terrible.
Boo, coach.
You are not forgiven, coach. So, I don't know,
you know
man.
Whose feet should be held to the fire is whoever was running the Bears at the time. They took Trubisky, number 2, and Jacksonville took Leonard Fournette. You think they could have liked to have Patrick Mahomes? I know they eventually got their quarterback in Trevor Lawrence 6 years later or whatever it was. Corey Davis to the Titans, and you're still stuck with Shanahan. The Chargers took Mike Williams out of USC. You think they would have wanted Patty Mahomes? The Bengals took John Ross, the wide receiver. Yeah, it worked out with Joe Burrow, but you think they would want Patrick Mahomes? So we can fire a bunch of people 6 years later if you want.
A lot of good coaches in there. A lot of good teams.
And a lot of teams that eventually found their quarterback. Chicago maybe notwithstanding.
We don't
and
know.
Tennessee
Maybe.
still hasn't.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of teams that passed on Patty Mahomes. And if you want to look at, further down the draft, Deshaun Watson at 12. New Orleans took Marshawn Lattimore, who's great, but they passed up on Deshaun Watson. So a lot of teams made decisions to not take these great quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing that it wasn't a miss. You're totally allowed to label it that way, and you can have any opinion you want with regard to the current 49er quarterback situation. You're completely allowed to do that. I think some of the comments we've gotten today are right in that wonderful hindsight is 2020 bucket. That's what I think. How did you do that? Well, that's because you didn't know. He didn't know. And a lot of people didn't know. And we didn't know. And I would much rather look at the Chiefs, for instance, who made a big swing, a big trade. And they moved up and got him. And they deserve a ton of credit for that. And they're reaping the rewards.
Yeah, they are.
They nailed it, man. They nailed it.
And the Niners, even though they've not found their quarterback, maybe they have, but for the sake of this discussion, they don't yet have a franchise quarterback yet.
Not yet.
They are 23-11 over the last 2 regular seasons and 4-2 in the postseason, and they are a favorite, again, to be there in the end of January, yet fans still want to go back to 2017 and cry in their cornflakes over Patrick Mahomes.